It was around 10 p.m. when I pulled into that lonely rest stop, and I swear, the moment I stepped out of the car, something in the air just shifted. Last year, I decided to take a road trip instead of flying, just for the experience. I wanted to visit a couple of old friends from high school who had moved to Berkeley to study at the University of California. Every summer, I make a point to see them. We grew up practically like brothers. Normally, I'd just book a flight, but this time I wanted to take the scenic route, stopping at parks, museums, and historical sites I'd always meant to check out. I left early that morning to make the most of the drive, knowing it would take a few days if I really wanted to enjoy each stop. The first 2 days were great, peaceful, relaxing, and totally uneventful. But by the third day, things took a turn. I had expected to be at my friend's place by nightfall, but instead I found myself still behind the wheel late into the evening. The clock had passed 9 p.m., maybe even closer to 10, and I was still out on the highway, deep in some forgotten stretch of road. Barely any cars passed me by, and although the calm was kind of nice, there was also something eerie about it. I've always had a thing about desolate roads. They make me nervous, like they're hiding something just beyond the tree line. I was tired, desperate for a bathroom break and something to jolt me awake. That's when I saw a small sign for a rest stop and decided to pull off. It wasn't one of those big highway travel centers with gas stations and truck parking. This was just a small building with a handful of parking spots out front. Simple, quiet, maybe too quiet. As I pulled in, I noticed how dark the place was. No other cars in sight. Just silence and a dim, flickering light above the doorway. I parked and stepped out, stretching my legs after hours on the road. My muscles were stiff, almost buzzing with tension. Still, I figured it was a quick stop. In and out. The building had a hallway layout, men's restroom on one side, women's on the other. A janitor's closet sat in the middle, along with a couple vending machines and a rack of random travel magazines. I headed toward one of the machines, scanning it for anything with caffeine. That's when I heard it, the low hum of another engine. I turned and saw a car pull in and park. But here's what bothered me. The lot was completely empty, yet they parked right next to mine. Out of all the open spaces, why that one? I told myself not to overthink it. I went into the restroom, handled my business, and came back out maybe 5 minutes later. The car was still there, engine on, headlights shining. I couldn't see the driver clearly through the glare, but they hadn't gotten out. I tried to shake it off, returned to the vending machine, and bought a Red Bull. But as I cracked it open and took a sip, my eyes kept drifting back to that car. Something didn't sit right. I couldn't explain it, but I had that creeping itch, the one you'd get when you know you're being watched. I finally decided to leave. I turned toward the door, but as I took a few steps, I heard the engine cut off behind me. Then, the click of a door opening. I froze. A man stepped out, tall, bearded, and wearing a brown leather jacket. His hands were buried in his pockets, and his eyes were locked onto me. There was something in his gaze that made my stomach twist. It wasn't just creepy, it was intentional. Like he'd been waiting. I tried to keep my cool, acting like it was no big deal. I started walking toward my car, passing him as naturally as I could. I nodded a greeting, and he nodded back, but there was nothing casual about it. It felt rehearsed. Like he was waiting for the right moment. I barely made it a few steps past him when I heard it. "Hey!" I turned around slowly, and found myself staring straight into the barrel of a 9mm pistol. His expression had changed. That fake smile was gone, replaced with something far worse, a slow, amused grin, like he was enjoying the fear on my face. "Why you in such a hurry?" he asked, voice low and smug. My breathing turned shallow. I raised my hands without thinking, showing I wasn't going to fight back. "What do you want?" I asked. He didn't blink. "Your watch. Your wallet. Your phone." He pointed the gun at my face and told me to kneel. And in that moment I knew I wasn't getting out of this forest alive. I did exactly what he said. Gave up my wallet, my phone, my watch, anything he wanted. I thought that would be it. I figured he'd take the stuff and vanish into the night. But no. He didn't leave. Instead, he tilted his head and gestured for me to follow. Not back into the building. No, he led me behind it, toward the trees. Toward the forest. And I followed, every step making my legs heavier than the last. By now, my heart was thudding so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. This wasn't a robbery anymore. This was something else. Something worse. I tried reasoning with him as we walked, told him he could take my car if he wanted, begged him to let me go. But he didn't say a word. Just kept walking, both hands still buried in his jacket pockets like he didn't have a care in the world. We didn't go far, maybe 15, 20 meters in, but out there, in that pitch-black stretch of woods, it felt like miles. Then he stopped. "Turn around," he said. I hesitated for half a second, but I did it. Slowly. We were face to face now. He was barely 2 meters away, eyes locked onto mine like a predator studying its prey. And then, he raised the gun again. Pointed it right at my face. That was it. I knew it. I was going to die right there, in the woods, alone and terrified. The only thing I could think about was my parents, how they'd feel getting the news. What my friends would say. Would anyone even find me? Tears were already streaming down my face. My whole body was trembling like I'd been thrown into a freezing river. He told me to kneel. So I did. I closed my eyes, teeth clenched, bracing for the end. Then, bang, bang, bang. 3 deafening shots shattered the silence. I screamed with each one, dropped flat onto the forest floor, face first in the dirt, sobbing and waiting for the pain. For the blood. For the blackness. But nothing came. No burning. No wounds. Just that cold, bone-deep fear. And then I heard it. Laughter. Not a chuckle. Not a nervous laugh. No, he was howling like he just watched the greatest comedy of all time. And there I was, curled up in the dirt like a child. "Go home, kid," he said through his laughter. "And don't forget to wash your pants." He turned around and walked away, still laughing, like none of it meant anything. I stayed there, motionless, feeling like my soul had been scraped raw. My fingers started moving on their own, patting my body, checking for bullet holes. Nothing. Not even a scratch. What I felt in that moment, it's hard to describe. Relief, sure. But also humiliation, confusion, and something darker, like a part of me had been broken, and I wasn't sure if it would ever fully heal. I stayed there for minutes, just lying in the dirt. Eventually I heard his car engine start, then fade into the distance. Only then did I make myself stand up. I walked back to the building in a daze, went into the bathroom, and stared at my reflection. My face was swollen, red, streaked with tears and snot. I splashed water on it, but I still looked like a man who'd been hollowed out. Shaking, I got back in my car and drove to the nearest town. I found a payphone, called the police, and gave them everything I could, description, timeline, even the license plate. I don't know if they ever found him. Part of me hopes they did. Another part of me hopes I never hear his name again. That night, I rented a motel room and tried to sleep. But I couldn't. Not really. The next morning, I drove the rest of the way to my friend's place without stopping once. I told them everything. They were stunned. Couldn't believe how close I came to dying. I stayed with them for a couple of weeks, like I do every summer, trying to act normal. But something inside me had changed. The fear stayed with me, lingering like smoke in a room you can't air out. And to this day, I've never stopped at another rest stop. It was 4 a.m., and the road was empty. Rain hammered the windshield like it wanted to break through, and I had no idea I was about to come face to face with death. My name's Tyler. I've been driving trucks for over 25 years, and I've seen just about everything the highway has to offer. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that night. It started with rain. Heavy rain. The kind that swallows headlights and makes the road disappear under a sheet of shimmering black. Visibility tanked in seconds, but I kept driving. After this many years, you learn how to handle rough weather. You learn how to stay calm, even when the road feels like it's turning on you. But that night, something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it, not at first. Just this low, gnawing unease in my chest. Like something was watching me. Waiting. Maybe it was the eerie silence inside the cab. Maybe I'd just been on the road too long. Whatever it was, it settled into my gut and wouldn't let go. I tried drowning it out with music, cranked the radio to keep my mind off the creeping anxiety, but the feeling never left. I slowed down. Always do in rain like that. Just enough to keep control if something went sideways. And then, something did. Through the fog and rain, I saw headlights. Fast. Too fast. Coming straight toward me in the opposite lane. I didn't even see the car until it was right on top of me. No time to think. I jerked the wheel hard to avoid the head-on collision, and that's when I lost it. The tires slipped. The weight of the trailer pulled sideways. I fought it with everything I had, but there was no grip left on that slick road. The whole rig went sideways, then tipped. And I remember the spin. That sick, weightless moment when time seems to stop, and all you hear is metal screaming and glass exploding. Then black. When I came to, I was lying on the freezing ground. Rain soaked through my clothes, and everything around me was a blur of pain and motion. My skull throbbed. My legs were numb. I couldn't move. The crash all came flooding back, flashing headlights, the loss of control, the tumble. I tried to call out, but my voice was weak. Barely a whisper. I was broken, bleeding, and alone in the middle of nowhere. Then footsteps. And the sound of an engine idling nearby. Out of the blur, two figures emerged, a man and a teenage boy. Father and son. They'd seen the wreck, pulled over, and come to help. They called for an ambulance, and stayed by my side while I drifted in and out of consciousness. When the paramedics arrived, everything moved fast, blinding lights, voices shouting, then a ride in the back of the ambulance that I barely remember. At the hospital, they told me the damage was bad, broken bones, internal bleeding, a serious head injury. They said I was lucky to be alive. I didn't feel lucky. The recovery was brutal. Days blurred into weeks. I couldn't walk. Could barely move. I relied completely on nurses and machines. I'd never felt so helpless in my life. But the worst part started after the pain began to fade. That's when the other stuff started. At first, it was subtle, waking up in the middle of the night with this gut feeling that I wasn't alone. That someone was watching me. I told myself it was just the trauma talking. The injury. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But the more it happened, the less sure I became. Then, one night I saw it. I opened my eyes to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. Tall. Motionless. Drenched in shadow. I couldn't make out a face. Just the outline of a person who shouldn't have been there. My chest tightened. I tried to scream, nothing came out. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Just lay there as it started to move closer. Step by step. I felt it lean over me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was staring right into mine. Then I felt it, cold breath, brushing against my face. So close, it was almost inside me. I squeezed my eyes shut. Tried to scream. Nothing but silence. My body was frozen in place, trapped somewhere between sleep and waking terror. And all I could do was pray. I opened my eyes, expecting him to still be there. But the figure at the foot of my bed was gone. And somehow, that was even worse. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When the nurses came in the next morning, I told them everything. How I'd woken up to find someone standing in my room, how he'd come closer, how I'd felt his breath on my skin. They brushed it off. Said it sounded like sleep paralysis. Probably a result of the head trauma or the stress. Totally normal, they said. Common in patients with brain injuries. But I didn't buy it. What I'd seen, it was real. It felt real. Too vivid. Too focused. That wasn't my brain glitching out, that was something else. And it didn't stop. After that night, I started seeing him more. Not just in my hospital room. Everywhere. Sometimes during the day. Sometimes when I was half awake. Always standing nearby. Always silent. You'd think I'd get used to it. I didn't. Every single time was like the first, a gut punch of fear, like ice water in my veins. It was driving me insane. But I didn't mention it again. I didn't want them upping my meds or strapping me to a bed. So instead I did my own digging. From my hospital bed, I searched the internet, determined to figure out what the hell had happened to me. I was convinced the figure had something to do with the crash. It had to. And that's when I started finding stories. Accidents. Dozens of them. All on that same cursed stretch of highway. All with eerie similarities. Some victims claimed they'd seen headlights coming at them out of nowhere. Others swore there'd been a figure in the road, right before they crashed. That's when the pieces started clicking. I wasn't the only one. The figure I kept seeing? The one stalking my hospital room? That was the same presence that had nearly killed me out there in the rain. The realization sent chills crawling up my spine. But I needed confirmation. I remembered the man who'd found me, Mason. He and his son were the ones who pulled me out of the wreck and stayed with me until the ambulance came. Before they left, Mason had given me his number, told me to call if I ever needed anything. That afternoon I did. I asked him point blank, had he seen the car? His answer shook me to my core. He said he'd been just a few hundred feet behind me. One moment my truck was steady, the next it veered hard to the left, started zigzagging, then flipped and rolled. But he never saw a car coming the other way. In fact, no other vehicles passed until the ambulance arrived. There was no car. There never had been. It was something else. Something that made me see what it wanted me to see. That night, after I hung up the phone and sat there in stunned silence, the figure came back. 11 p.m. Standing again at the foot of my bed. But this time, he didn't vanish. He spoke. His voice was gravel and wind, like something barely remembered. He told me he used to be a truck driver. Just like me. Said he died on that very stretch of highway. A night just like mine, dark, wet, invisible roads. A car had come from the opposite direction. Fast. Wrong lane. Headlights out of nowhere. But unlike me, he hadn't been able to swerve in time. The crash killed them both. As he spoke, I couldn't move. My whole body was frozen, not by fear this time, but by sorrow. It was the voice of someone stuck. Lost in the moment of their death, playing it over and over again. Reliving it through others. Right as I opened my mouth to speak, the door burst open. A nurse entered with my medication. The figure vanished, like he'd never been there at all. That was the last time I ever saw him. But the story didn't end there. The next day, I searched again. Dug deeper. And after hours of scrolling, I found it, an old newspaper clipping from 35 years ago. A fatal crash on that highway. A.S.E. Tyler driver, drunk, had entered the highway going the wrong direction and hit a cargo truck head-on. Neither driver survived. No photos. No names. But that was it. That was his story. And suddenly it all made sense. The figure haunting me wasn't the trucker. It was the other one. The man in the car. The one who caused the crash. The one who never meant to die but took someone with him when he did. Maybe he wasn't haunting the road out of vengeance. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe he didn't even know he was dead. And the trucker? Just another soul caught in that endless loop of headlights and rain. They were both trapped. Doomed to replay that crash again and again, each time dragging someone else into their nightmare. I survived. Barely. But I don't think they ever will. And sometimes, when I'm alone on the road at night, and the rain starts falling heavy and thick, I swear I still see them. One in the trees. One in the lane. and I just keep driving. Faster. And I don't look back. Since that night, whenever I get the chance, I whisper a prayer for both of them, hoping, wherever they are, they've finally found peace. My name is Julian. What I'm about to tell you happened back in August of 2008, and I remember every second like it just happened yesterday. It was one of the most brutal summers we'd had in years. The kind where the heat hangs heavy on your skin like a wet blanket. I was behind the wheel of my old cargo truck, hauling steel sheets to a construction site deep in southern Missouri. After more than 2 decades on the road, I thought I'd seen it all. But that night, what I saw, what I lived through, still crawls into my dreams and leaves me cold with fear. I was cruising down Highway 60, somewhere in the middle of the Mark Twain National Forest. Gorgeous place in the daylight, sunlight sifting through endless trees, but at night? It's a black void, all shadows and silence. The kind of silence that feels alive. I was making good time and had planned to stop near Springfield to use the restroom, grab a bite, maybe catch a few hours of sleep. But a few miles out from that truck stop, something caught my eye. An old, battered truck sat hunched on the roadside, its hood propped open like a broken jaw. As I got closer, I saw a stocky man waving both arms, trying to flag me down. We truckers have a kind of silent pact. We don't leave our own stranded, so I eased off the gas, pulled a little ways ahead, and stepped out. The guy was probably in his mid-40s, wearing what might have once been a white flannel baseball shirt, now soaked with grease. His face and hands matched, filthy, slick, worn. It was obvious he'd been wrestling with that engine for hours. As I walked up, he started toward me with a tired smile. "Thank God you stopped," he said, genuinely relieved. We shook hands. Said his name was Trevor. Told me he'd been stuck there for 4, maybe 5 hours. Said the alternator was shot and asked if I could drop him off in the next town so he could find a mechanic and a place to crash for the night. He looked harmless enough. Something about him seemed sincere, so I nodded. The next town was only about 20 miles away. No way I was gonna leave the guy stranded in the middle of nowhere with the sun bleeding out of the sky. Trevor grabbed a small duffel bag from his truck, tossed it over his shoulder, and climbed into my passenger seat. From the get-go, he was chatty. Said he was from Alabama and was on his way to St. Louis to pick up a load. Said his truck had been giving him trouble for a while, but he figured he could push through. About 15, maybe 20 minutes down the road, I noticed 2 cars in my rearview mirror. Driving tight, one behind the other, following closer than I liked. At first I figured they were just impatient and waiting to pass. But they didn't. They stayed behind us. Mile after mile. I started getting that feeling in my gut, the one that whispers something's not right. I glanced at Trevor, gestured toward the mirror. "You know them?" I asked. He turned, looked back, then shook his head. "Never seen them before." I tried to play it off with a nervous chuckle. "You sure you're not running from someone?" He laughed too, but his voice cracked, and I could see the sweat starting to bead on his forehead. That's when I knew he was scared too. Those cars kept tailing us for 10 more miles. Not once did they try to pass. Just lurking back there. And then we hit a stretch of road where the woods pressed in on both sides, like the trees were leaning in to watch. That's when they made their move. Both cars gunned it. They roared past and then swerved in front of me, cutting me off hard. I slammed on the brakes so hard my rig shuddered. Everything stopped. "What the hell?" I muttered, heart hammering. 3 guys got out of the cars. Armed. Walking straight toward us. Trevor had gone pale. He was drenched in sweat, hands clenched tight in his lap. I reached under my seat for my gun, only to remember I'd left it at home. Company policy had changed, and they'd started cracking down on drivers carrying firearms. I'd meant to be compliant. And now it might cost me. The men took position at both sides of my truck, guns raised. One of them barked at us to get out. I looked at Trevor. He looked like he was about to pass out. I raised my hand slowly. "We don't want trouble," I said. "Take whatever you want." But the guy didn't budge. He repeated the order, this time with more venom. Get out. Of course, we did what we were told. No hesitation. We climbed down from the truck slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. Trevor stumbled as his foot caught the step, almost hitting the ground. One of the gunmen barked an order and waved us to the side of the road, keeping his weapon trained on us the whole time. Empty your pockets, he growled. We handed over everything, wallets, phones, keys. I offered them the truck too, desperate to stay alive. You can take the rig if you want. Just let us go, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Shut up, the leader snapped, his voice slicing through the night like a knife. He took our belongings, tossed them into the back of one of the cars, then turned and walked back toward us, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. The others never moved their guns from us, not for a second. Then, out of nowhere, the guy tossed my truck keys back at me. They landed with a jingle at my feet. He nodded toward the cab. Get in. Start it up. I hesitated, just for a beat, then looked at Trevor. He looked as lost as I felt. But I wasn't about to argue, not with that gun still pointed at my head. I climbed back into the truck, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. That's when they pulled Trevor away. The ringleader gestured at the car, ordering Trevor to get in with two of the armed men. I wasn't sure what the hell was going on, but I knew better than to resist. I was alone in the truck. Trevor was sandwiched in the back seat with those guys. The third man climbed into the car behind me. We drove. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably 20 minutes tops. They led us off the highway and onto a narrow dirt road that twisted deeper into the forest. The trees thickened on either side, like they were swallowing us whole. Every instinct I had screamed trap, but I had no way out. Even if I tried to escape, I couldn't leave Trevor behind. Who knew what they'd do to him? We came to a stop in a small clearing, barely large enough for the vehicles. The cars shut off. The silence that followed felt unnatural, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. One of the guys motioned for me to step out of the truck. My hands were shaking. My pulse thundered in my ears. If they'd wanted to rob us, they could have done it on the highway. But they brought us here. That meant there was more to it. Something worse. The leader waved me toward the trees. Trevor was already being dragged ahead by the short, stocky guy, the one with a twisted little smirk and dead eyes. He turned his head toward me just long enough to flash a grin that turned my stomach. We walked for a few minutes through the dense trees, until it came into view, an old, rotting cabin swallowed by time and moss. The door hung slightly ajar, and the place stank of mildew and decay. They shoved us inside. The place was a mess, broken furniture, piles of garbage, a couch covered in dust and God knows what else. They barked at us to sit. I obeyed, heart hammering in my chest. What do you want? I asked the ringleader, trying to keep my voice from cracking. The stocky guy just grinned again, that same devilish smile, and said, Just making sure you don't go running to the cops. Then he turned to the others and let out a laugh, low and cruel. The others joined in, like this was some twisted joke only they understood. Without another word, they started tying us up, hands, feet tight. The kind of knots that were meant to stay. The third guy leaned in with a mocking tone, sneering. Don't go anywhere. And they all burst into laughter again before stepping outside and slamming the door behind them. As soon as I heard the lock click, I started squirming. My wrists burned as I fought the ropes, but I didn't stop. Trevor, I whispered. We've got to get out of here. He looked like he was about to pass out. Pale. Shaking. His voice was barely a whisper. They're gonna kill us, aren't they? Not if we move fast. I told him, trying to sound like I wasn't just as scared. We're getting out. We're not dying out here. It was slow, painful work, but I could feel the rope loosening. Every tug scraped my skin raw. Then, outside, we heard it. The car engines. Starting up. Driving off. They left. The sound faded into the trees, swallowed by the forest. And then silence. Heavy. Unnatural. I finally broke free and rushed to untie Trevor. His hands were trembling as he mumbled, "Thanks, buddy. Save it," I told him. "Let's make it out of here first." We stumbled out of that cabin into the pitch black of the forest. The sky had already gone dark, and the only thing we could see was the faint reflection of moonlight filtering through the trees. No cars. No truck. Nothing. Trevor looked at me. "Do you even know how to get back?" Truth was, I didn't. We'd walked too far off the highway, taken too many turns. But I knew we had to move. Fast. "Opposite direction of the cabin," I said. "We'll find the road." We walked. Stumbling over roots, catching on branches, barely able to see more than a few feet ahead. My ears strained for any sound, any hint of tires crunching gravel, voices, footsteps. Anything. We found the road eventually, but doubt crept in fast. What if they came back? What if they were watching us from the woods, just waiting to see what we'd do? We didn't talk. Just walked along the edge of the road, keeping one foot in the trees, ready to dive into the underbrush if we had to. The moon guided us, silver light tiling off the leaves, just enough to keep us from walking blind. But something about that silence. It didn't feel like we were alone. After what felt like an eternity, the faint hum of an approaching engine stirred the night. My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed Trevor and dragged him off the roadside into the brush. "Down!" I hissed, both of us crouching low in the dark, barely breathing as the vehicle drew closer. The headlights pierced through the trees, too dim, too scattered. It wasn't one of the cars from earlier. As it rolled by, we saw it was just an old beat-up SE Tyler, crawling slowly down the road. Behind the wheel sat an older man, maybe in his late 60s, squinting through thick glasses. I didn't wait. I bolted up from the bushes, waving both arms like a madman. "Hey! Hey! Please stop!" The car slowed, then rolled to a stop. The window slid down a few inches. "What's going on here?" the man asked, voice cautious, eyes scanning us warily. "Please," I said, out of breath. "We were carjacked, kidnapped. They took everything. We need help. Can you call the police?" He studied us for a beat, dirty, scraped, wide-eyed. Then he gave a slow nod. "Hop in. I'll take you to the sheriff's office." Relief hit us like a wave. We climbed into the back seat, breathless, still shaking. His name was Jeff, a local. He drove us to a little town called Ellington, no more than a blink on the map. He dropped us off at the sheriff's office, then wished us luck and quietly drove off into the night. Sheriff Ethan greeted us, grizzled, stone-faced, the kind of man who's seen more than he says. We told him everything. Every detail. Every turn down that dirt road. Every second of terror. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't laugh it off. "You boys are lucky to be breathing," he said. And he meant it. His deputies took us back into the forest. The cabin was empty. Silent. No sign of the men. But a short call on the radio changed everything. My truck had been found. Abandoned but untouched. The sheriff eyed the woods like something might still be watching. "Stay alert," he warned. They could still be nearby. We thanked him, and not long after, we were back on the road, back to the land of headlights and truck stops and thin coffee. We called our companies. Filed reports. But mostly, we just sat in silence, shaken. At the truck stop, Trevor and I parted ways. We exchanged numbers. Swore we'd keep in touch. We never did. But every time I drive through southern Missouri, I think about him. About those men. About how close we came to vanishing. It changed me. Made me more cautious. I still stop to help when I can, but my hand always hovers near the door lock, just in case. I've accepted that the road holds secrets. That not all of them want to be found. But I keep driving. Because that's what I do. I'm a trucker. My name is Marco, and the story I'm about to tell you is the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. One night, while cruising through the empty desert roads of Arizona, I stopped at a taco truck outside a trailer park, and stumbled into something I wish I could forget. I used to work nights at this converted ranch hotel out in the middle of nowhere. Peaceful job. Barely any guests. It was probably the easiest gig I ever had. Only problem? The hour-and-a-half drive home every single night. At first, I hated it. It ate into my life. But eventually, I settled into the routine. Same route, same stars, same silence. That night, I was starving, hadn't eaten all shift. So when I spotted that familiar taco truck parked near the entrance of the RV park, I pulled off the road without thinking. I'd passed it before, probably a dozen times, but never stopped. This time, I couldn't ignore the hunger gnawing at my gut. I parked, got out of the car, and walked toward the truck. It was dimly lit, the kind of glow that barely stretched past its service window. The air smelled of grilled meat and onions, warm and inviting despite the cold desert wind. But as I got closer, something felt off. There were no other customers. No sound but the hum of the generator and the faint sizzling of food. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from inside that truck. To my surprise, the guy running that taco truck turned out to be a master at his craft. I'd been starving, sure, but those tacos? They tasted like something holy. Like they'd been made by the hands of a saint. I ordered them to go, sat in my car, and devoured them like a man who hadn't eaten in days. I drove home that night with a full belly and the feeling that I'd stumbled upon something special. A hidden gem in the middle of nowhere. And the next night? I went back. Then the next. And soon enough, it became a ritual. Not every single night, but often enough that it became part of my routine, one of the few things I looked forward to after work. Eventually, I stopped eating in my car. I'd stand by the truck, scarfing down tacos with a grin, taking my time with the salsas, green, red, that smoky habanero that felt like fire in your chest. I'd finish with a soda and a smoke under the pale fluorescent light that buzzed above the truck. The guy even kept a stash of lemon-scented hand wipes, which he always handed me with a nod. We talked often, about life, about work, about nothing in particular. Yet, weirdly enough, I never asked him his name. Not once. And he never asked mine. It just never came up. We were strangers with a familiar rhythm. That's all we needed. Looking back, I wish I'd asked. Because the night came when knowing his name might have meant everything. And I had nothing. It started like any other night. I parked in the usual spot outside the RV park. The desert air was cooler than usual, crisp and still. I walked up to the truck expecting the same smell of grilled meat, the warm glow, the guy behind the counter nodding hello with tongs in hand. But tonight was different. The window was shut. No sizzle. No light from inside. No sign of the guy. At first, I figured maybe he was just running late. Or maybe he'd stepped out for a quick break. I waited. A minute passed. Then another. Nothing. I looked around. The road behind me was empty, no cars in sight. The RV park was dead quiet, eerily so. Not a single porch light. Not even the distant sound of a TV through thin trailer walls. It was like the world had hit pause. I stepped closer and called out. "Hey, amigo! You burnin' the meat or what?" No answer. That's when I caught the scent, faint at first, but unmistakable. Something was burning. Not wood, not trash. Something greasy and charred. I stood on my toes, tried to peer in through the darkened serving window, but the grill was too high. All I could see was the faint plume of smoke rising behind the metal. I called out again. Louder. "Hey! Something's burning in there!" Still nothing. Just silence, and the soft, sinister sound of fat sizzling on steel. I started getting nervous, not just about the tacos, but about the guy. What if he'd passed out in the back? Had a heart attack? Choked? It wouldn't take much for the whole truck to catch fire. And yeah, maybe I was worried about my favorite food spot going up in flames, but mostly, I didn't want anything bad to happen to the guy. He was solid. Reliable. one of the last constants in my crazy routine. So I circled around to the side of the truck where the service stairs were. Just a narrow fold-down set under a plain white door. I hesitated, hand hovering over the handle. Then I grabbed it, pulled the door open, and everything changed. The first thing I saw was the cash register, open, ransacked. The drawer was yanked out and flipped upside down, spilling coins across the metal counter like someone had been in a hurry. Or a struggle. The second thing I noticed was the silence. No music. No humming. No signs of life. Just the steady hiss of something still cooking, and no one attending it. My stomach dropped. Something had happened here. And whatever it wasn't over. And my first thought when I saw the mess inside the taco truck was robbery. But it didn't feel violent. Not at first glance. The drawer had been yanked out and change scattered, yeah, but nothing else looked trashed. No splintered wood, no overturned pans, no signs of a struggle. I tried to convince myself maybe the guy had just been threatened, maybe someone pulled a gun, told him to back off, then took the cash and ran. A hit and run. That would explain the silence, the missing money. But it still pissed me off. This guy had built something, probably worked his ass off to buy this truck, to build a name for himself out here in the middle of nowhere. And some low-life piece of trash just strolled in and took it all. Even worse, there was no one around to help. No one to stop it. Still, I took a small breath of relief knowing at least the guy hadn't been hurt. That was before I walked toward the grill. It was still burning. Flames licking up around something I couldn't quite see from where I stood. I stepped up onto the small metal stairs to reach the counter, turned to the left, and that's when my heart stopped. There, scorched onto the metal surface, was a blackened, charred outline of a human hand. Not a glove. Not a smudge. A perfectly burned handprint. Flesh and bone. As if someone had tried to push themselves up and got branded in place. I staggered backward, nearly falling off the steps. My knees went weak, and for a second, all I could hear was the hiss of burning fat and my own pulse roaring in my ears. I forced myself to move, bent down, opened the cabinet under the grill, and shut off the flame without looking again. I backed out of that truck like it was going to swallow me whole, slammed the door, and speed-walked to my car with shaking hands. Fumbling for my phone, I dialed 911. I didn't even know what to say. I told the dispatcher there'd been a robbery, maybe an attack. That the vendor was missing. That something terrible had happened, and I didn't even know the guy's name. My voice cracked halfway through. The dispatcher said officers were on the way. But no one came. I waited. For half an hour. Then nearly an hour. Nothing. Not even headlights on the road. I sat in my car, watching the truck like he might come back, maybe with a bandaged arm, maybe just needing help. But no one came. No footsteps. No figures. No sirens. Finally, I drove home in a fog. I was angry, confused, sick to my stomach. And I hated myself for not knowing his name. If I had, maybe I could have done more. Looked him up. Called someone? I tried Googling it later. Taco truck accident, street vendor burned in robbery. But nothing ever matched. I never saw that truck again. Never saw him again. Just gone. That was in June 2018. A few weeks after that, I decided to take a quick solo trip to unwind before heading back to college. The plan was simple: leave early, see a few sights, head home by night. No hotels. Just the open road and me. Everything was going fine, until the drive back. I left later than I planned, closer to 10 p.m., and after a few hours behind the wheel, fatigue hit me like a brick. I splashed water on my face from my canteen, but it didn't help. My eyes were getting heavy, my reflexes slower. I told myself the next rest stop I saw, I'd pull in and grab an hour of sleep. Better that than ending up in a ditch. A few miles later, like it was waiting for me, one appeared, quiet, empty, lights flickering. I pulled into the lot. Not a single other car. Felt abandoned. But I was too tired to care. I leaned my seat back, set my alarm for an hour, and dozed off. When the alarm buzzed, I blinked awake, groggy but slightly better. That's when my bladder decided to ruin everything. Of course. So I climbed out of the car and headed toward the restrooms. The building was dimly lit and cold. I pushed into the men's room, picked a stall, and sat. 30 seconds later, I heard talking. It came from outside the restroom, in the hallway. Just a faint murmur, like someone muttering under their breath. But that didn't make sense. My car had been the only one in the lot. I didn't hear anyone pull in. Didn't see any movement. Then, the door creaked open. My heart rate ticked up, but I stayed still, listening. Probably just another traveler. A trucker or a late-night driver. Nothing weird. Until the knocking. A soft, deliberate knock on the stall door. I swallowed hard. Occupied, I said. Silence. Then an eye. Someone was peering through the crack between the stall door and frame. We locked eyes. And then, he screamed. Loud. Unhinged. And began slamming his forehead into the door. Thud. 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 What the hell? I muttered, adrenaline spiking. He didn't stop. I pressed my body against the door, holding it shut, trying to brace it with everything I had. But the pounding got worse. He was shrieking now, like something feral. Something wrong. I had no choice. I yanked the door open and slammed into him, knocking him off balance, then ran, full sprint, out of the bathroom, through the corridor, toward the lot. I was halfway to my car when I heard the building door crash open behind me. He was chasing me. I didn't look back. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and threw it in reverse. As I peeled back, I felt a slam against the side of my door. I checked the rearview mirror. The man was standing there, just watching me. Motionless. His face was blank now. Calm. Like the screaming had never happened. I drove off, speeding like hell, too stunned to cry, too confused to scream. The rest of the way home, I didn't blink. My body was writing pure fear. My brain couldn't wrap around it. What had I just seen? Who was that man? And more importantly, how did he get there? That rest stop was miles from anything. No bikes. No cars. No paths. Nothing. Just me and him. To this day, I've never stopped at another rest stop again. And I don't ever plan to.